How's everybody doing? How was last week? Homecoming week. Guys had a good time? A lot of fun tailgates, events happening. What's going on, brother? Cool, good to have you guys back. How many of you guys are familiar with the venture studio model? Raise your hand if you know what a venture studio is. Okay, just a few. So the difference between a venture capital firm and a venture studio is that venture capital firms are just investing into startups. And yes, they can be hands-on or they can be hands-off. Some of them help more than others. But venture studios are really focused on building their own companies internally. And they have different models, but the majority of them work like this. They will have their own, founder in residence or entrepreneur in residence. And those are the people responsible for coming up with new ideas and actually building the early versions of the product. And then they usually maybe in a month, they'll come up with let's just say 10 to 20 different companies. And then they'll kill most of them. And they'll say, okay, this one looks interesting. This one looks interesting. And they will give some capital to actually get those off the ground. And then once they get to a certain point, they actually try to find a CEO to bring in to run the company, which I've always been pretty skeptical about venture studio models because I feel like the best startups are built it's all about the founding team. And it's hard to have that same degree of passion for a startup if you're just being brought in to run the company instead of it's your baby and you came up with this. So, but there are some really smart people who are way more successful than us that are running venture studios. And Atomic is one of those. They have spun out brands like Hims and Hers, Open Door, Open Store. Keith Boy is running Open Store, I believe. And they're worth over $1 billion now. And then another one is called Exowatt, which is an energy company, energy for data centers, backed by Sam Altman, backed by Founders Fund. So how many of you guys got the email this morning? Raise your hand. Did anybody not get the email? Raise your hand. Okay. Please email Brandon Woodard. That's the email right there. Brandon's our intern. He's been doing great work. If you guys are not on the email list and are not getting the updates, please reach out to him and he'll add you to that list. And typically we'll reach out every Tuesday morning. Tuesday's kind of like start of launch competition day. So we'll try to email every Tuesday morning to keep you guys updated about what we have going on. And then also we're doing office hours. So I think So every Tuesday from 2:30 to 4 p.m., we're going to be at Malachowski Hall at the Spark Studio. Raise your hand if you know where Spark Studio is. Okay, yeah, most people. It's pretty easy to find. You walk into Malachowski Hall, you go up the stairs that are right there, and it's to your right. So yeah, we'll be there every Tuesday, 2:30 to 4. And that's an opportunity to just come in and, whatever you're struggling with, whatever questions you have, just pop in, or even if you just want to work on your startup, you can just pop in there. And they have plenty of desks and areas to work out of. So yeah, feel free to join for that. So we didn't get to this last week, but we're going to be sharing this week a sheet with all of you guys that will be the place where you can submit your weekly updates. And this is going to be for anybody competing who actually wants to compete for the $10,000 prize. This is mandatory. You have to submit updates every single week. And these are the 3 things that we're looking to see. So number 1, what did you get done over the past week? Number 2, what are you struggling with the most right now? What are the biggest challenges you're facing? And number 3, what do you plan to get done in the next week? So pretty simple. It doesn't have to be an essay. It could literally be like 2 paragraphs or even less than that potentially. But yeah, we want to see that you guys are actually doing stuff. We want to see that, if you're actually trying to build something, then there's going to be challenges. It's not all going to be smooth sailing. So we want to know what you're struggling with so we can try to help with that. And then we want to know the main thing here is we want to keep track of how quickly you're executing and how quickly you're moving, because that's one of the big criteria for how we're going to select the top 3 for the competition. So any questions on that? So it'll just be right before each session. So what I'll say is Tuesdays by 4 p.m. So by the end of the office hours that we do every week. And yeah, it should be good. Question over here?
How we submit it? We send it to an email?
what we're planning to do, and if this changes, we'll just email you guys, but the plan as of right now, which is what we did last year, is we're gonna have a Google Sheet, and it's gonna be a template that each of you guys will have your own, right? And then every week you can go in and just update, this is week 1, this is week 2. So for between now and next week, there should be 2 of these filled out, because we didn't send it out last week, so you're gonna have to update for the first week and for this upcoming week as well. But yeah, it'll be a Google Sheet. You can just go in, fill it out, and then we'll have access to that, so we can just check that whenever, pretty much. So, any other questions on that? All right, good. And then lastly, in order to compete, you do have to fill out the application, which is pretty straightforward. Raise your hand if you already filled it out. Nice, that's great. How long did it take you guys, for everybody who filled it out?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't take a long time. So at the most, probably 30 minutes. But yeah, you can get it done in 2 to 10 minutes, probably. So just make sure you fill that out, because if you don't, then you're not officially in the running, in the competition. All right. Any questions about anything in general regarding the competition or what we just covered? Question?
What was the deadline for the application?
Oh, great question, the deadline. So we were gonna set the deadline for November 1st, but we're postponing that by a week since we haven't sent you guys the weekly update sheet, and then we also didn't send you guys the application until this morning. So we're gonna give everybody until November, I believe it's November 8th, but whatever the second week of November is, we'll give you guys to then to sign up, and yeah, after that it's gonna be closed off. So people can still join for the class, but they will not be able to enter the competition at that point. Question? So the last session will be November 19th, actually, which is less than a month away at this point. But the competition does not end until December 10th. So the reason that there's a gap there is because Thanksgiving break, and then we're actually out of town during Art Basel for a big event we're hosting down there the first week of December. But we will be back, and December 10th, we're gonna have the official demo day. So the goal is for us to let you guys know who the top 3 is by the end of Thanksgiving week. And that way, whoever the top 3 are, you guys will have a week and a half or so to prepare your presentations, practice. If you want to set up time to practice virtually, you could do that. But yeah, it's going to go on until then. And then at that day, we're going to have a VC panel. We're going to have probably 2 speaker sessions, and then the speakers are all going to be the judges for the competition. So you're going to be pitching, and obviously me and Justis are going to have our own perspectives, but we will not be involved in picking the actual winner. We're just picking the top 3. And from that point on, everybody else is going to pick the winner. So yeah. Any other questions there? All right, cool. So it is 6:17, so we've got about 12 minutes. I'm going to try to get through this pretty quickly. And I know that some of the stuff that YG is going to cover is also similar, but it's okay to help reinforce certain things. And maybe there will be some things that conflict, and you guys can form your own opinions about what makes the most sense. So today we're continuing to talk about the earliest stages. I kind of boiled down what it takes to build a successful company into 4 major stages. The first being market validation, which kind of goes hand in hand with building an MVP. Then building out the fully fledged product, and then you reach product market fit, and at that point it's just pouring more fuel on the fire and scaling. So we're still covering the first 2 portions of that, which is market validation and building that MVP. And notice on the side it says talking to users, because that never ends. It doesn't matter if you're a publicly traded company or if you're just starting out at the idea stage, you always want to be talking to users, and that is how you're going to continue to innovate and iterate on your product. So when you're thinking about market validation, there's 3 real questions that you want to think about. 1, is there a real problem? And it sounds like a silly question, but it's actually a very valid one, because oftentimes, especially entrepreneurs who come up with their own ideas, they are so excited and so enthused about what they're building that they don't really stop to think, is this solving a major problem? How big is the problem, right? So number 2, you want to understand who has the problem. If you don't understand who has the problem, you probably shouldn't be trying to solve that problem because, again, this is your target audience, your target demographic that you're building for. And if you're not in constant contact with these people, then it's going to be very tough to get their feedback and to actually get your first few customers and continue to scale. So who has a problem? Number 3, are they willing to pay for a solution? And this comes down to, is it a big enough problem? Is it a big enough pain point? Is it something that they really need a solution for, like right now? Or is it something that it's just like kind of annoying, but like they can live without a solution right now? So we're going to go over how to talk to users. Number 1, you never want to ask a user for ideas. If Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. If Steve Jobs had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a larger phone with a larger screen or more buttons or whatever. Like, again, what you want to ask when you're talking to users is you're trying to understand the problem, and you're trying to understand everything about them, like their journey, like where do they spend their time, and like what do they struggle with, and like particularly around the problem, how long have they been experiencing that, and how big of a pain point is it for them? So we're going to go over most common mistakes when talking to users, and then we're going to go over some questions that you guys, no matter what business you're building, it will be valuable to ask these questions to your target users. So mistake number 1, focusing too much on your idea instead of the problem. You never want to talk about your idea or what you're building. You want to ask them about their problem. That's key. That's number 1. 2, you don't want to talk in hypotheticals. You don't want to say things like, hey, if you were to have this, would that do this? Like, if this product could do this, like, would you pay this for it? Like, you don't really want to ask those types of questions. Again, you want to focus on understanding their pain points around the problem that you're trying to solve. 3, talking too much. Really, what you need to understand is that this time that you get with your users, this should be like very precious time for you, right? Because you're actually getting to learn from the expert. You're not the expert, they're the expert, because they're the ones who have the problem. So you should be listening as much as possible. You shouldn't be trying to take that time to like pitch them or like sell them something. Like, it's really your time to learn. Okay, those 3. Okay, so we'll get into some questions that are going to be relevant no matter what you're building. 1, what is the hardest part about doing X? And this will help you focus in on like what is the part that is going to be the most important for you to solve, right? And this is going to give you ideas about how to build out your product. Number 2, when is the last time that you had this problem? And if you remember from last week, for those of you who were there, we talked about this when thinking about ideas, the XY chart of frequency and intensity. So this question really gets to the frequency of the problem. How often do they have this problem? And this is going to tell you like a number of things, but 1, it's going to tell you, okay, is this a problem that they have often, or is it a problem that they haven't had in years and they just had it like once or twice? And based on that answer, it could tell you a couple of things, but you have to be interpreting. You have to use your best judgment to understand and pull data from these questions and answers, right? So it could tell you, 1, this is not your target market because this person doesn't have the problem very frequently, right? Or it could just mean that, hey, this is my target market. The problem is not a very frequent problem, which means it better be a very intense problem. They better be willing to pay you a lot of money for it, for your solution. Otherwise, you don't have a viable business, right? So you really want to understand that. Number 3, why was this hard? And again, this is just to dig a little bit deeper, but like maybe it was hard because this person, you never know. Maybe it's like a standout situation where this person is like getting from point A to point B was hard because they got lost, because they just moved to this new city and they didn't know how to get there, right? Or maybe it's a legitimate problem that a lot of people have, and now you can start to understand patterns around maybe is it difficult for the same reasons for everybody, right? And you want to identify these commonalities. What, if anything, have you done to try to solve this problem? This is super critical because what this tells you is it really validates whether it's a significant enough problem or not. If they haven't tried anything to solve it, then it probably means that it's not a big enough problem for them. If they have, then it shows you like, and some people will say, yeah, I've tried everything, right? People say stuff like that. People have tried to come up with their own makeshift solutions or like use other products that are not designed for whatever this is, just because they're desperate for a solution. That's a great sign. They're dying for something, right? They're looking for something right now, and they'll probably pay you money for it. And the other thing that this question tells you is it informs you about the competition. Because if they say, hey, like, I've been using this, and now you know, like, oh, well, there's another app that's doing this, or there's a couple of other solutions that are already out there that maybe solve this problem. And what don't you love about the solution you have already tried? So this helps tell you if there are competing products, where are the gaps? What are they missing? And that is your opportunity to enter the market. So this is why it's so important to ask these questions, because it's really going to inform exactly every little piece of the journey of you building your product and how you're building it. So super important. If you have an MVP, if you don't have an MVP, you want to get one out as soon as possible. If you do have an MVP, you want to put it in the hands of your users as soon as possible. Because people will tell you one thing, but their behavior speaks louder than the words, right? It's like you can go around campus right now and say, hey, I've got this solution for studying. It makes it easier to connect with other people to study with. Would you pay $5 a month for it? And you might get 10 people that tell you yes, right? Maybe 80% of people will tell you yes. And then you actually launch it and nobody signs up. So the user behavior speaks louder than whatever words they're telling you when you're interviewing them and when you're talking to them. This is why it's so important to track all the data that you can around your users. And there are several tools out there to do this. I'm not an expert here, and I can suggest some things, but like if you do a couple Google searches, you should be able to find plenty of things. I know I've heard of like Mixpanel is a good one, but it depends on what you're building. Because if you're building hardware, then it's going to be completely different. If you're building a consumer product, it's completely different than if you're building a B2B product. So, but you want to be tracking these metrics. And from the investor lens, I'll tell you, one thing that we always ask when we're meeting with founders is, has there been any churn, right? If they already have some revenue, if they already have a lot of users, if there's a lot of growth, things seem to be going great, well, what about the people that signed up with you a year ago? How many of those are still using your product, right? That's super important for us to understand because, well, are all these new customers just new people? Did everybody else who was there fall off? What does that tell you? That it's not a very sticky product, or it's not solving a big enough need, or maybe people are just using it for the free trial or freemium or whatever it is, and it's not that big of a pain point. So you've got to be tracking this data, and this is why it's so important to be talking to your users regularly too. Because when you talk to them, if they're already using your product, now you have even more to talk about, right? You can say like, hey, like, how have you used it in the past week? How many times? How has it helped you? What did you not like about it? These are things that you can start to ask. Okay, we've got 3 minutes here. So yeah, you want to learn from the user behavior. I got a couple case studies. I'll start off here if we need to pause, but I can get to the rest of them at the end. But we'll start off with Airbnb. So how many of you guys know the story of Airbnb? Raise your hand. Okay, couple. All right. Who knows what Airbnb stands for? Okay, wait, not you. Somebody else. In the back? Airbnb and breakfast. Great, yeah. So the founders of Airbnb were actually building something else in San Francisco. The rent was super expensive. They were running out of money, and they couldn't pay rent. there was a big design conference happening in San Francisco, and they said, hey, what if we just rent out some airbeds in our living room? And they did. And they actually, as soon as the three people, they had 3 people on airbeds, as soon as they left, they were like, oh wow, we have a viable business opportunity here. So they start pursuing it, but it takes a long time before they get traction. Along that time, they got into Y Combinator, which is the top startup accelerator in the world. Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator, gave them some of the most critical advice they've ever received, which he said, well, one, he asked them, where are the majority of your users? And they said, New York. And Paul Graham's like, what are you doing here? He's like, go to New York. So the founders of Airbnb go to New York. They spend about 3 weeks out there. They stay with Airbnbs. Back then, you had to show up at the house, and there was no way to pay online. So you have to bring cash or a check and like meet the owners, give them the money, and then you get to stay, right? So they stay with a bunch of hosts, and they realized that, hey, this is like a really weird experience. We have to pay people when we get there. So that informed them about, oh, why don't we make it so people can just pay online, right? That was one thing. Number 2, they come from a design background. So they rented out all these expensive cameras, and they started taking pictures of every single one to make the pictures look better online, because they noticed all the Airbnb pictures that they had were not high quality because smartphone cameras were not great back then. So they started taking all these good pictures, they upload it, they get back to San Francisco, all of a sudden, growth takes off like crazy. They get to profitability, and the rest is history. Now it's whatever, $100 billion company or beyond. But if they hadn't actually gone to visit their users, they would have never unlocked that insight, right? And that was the key. That was one of the key insights that Paul Graham helped them realize, and that helped them really scale and continue to grow. Okay, who knows who these guys are? Raise your hand if you know. Okay, Brandon knows. A few people, yeah. Okay, these are the founders of Twitch, which used to be called Justin.tv. And so going back to what we were talking about in regards to talking to your customers and really understanding the problem. So Justin.tv had a very crazy journey, and I actually got to meet one of their very first investors when I was in San Francisco. His name is Mike Maples. He's like a legendary VC from Floodgate Ventures. And he just wrote a book, which I would highly recommend everybody read. I got a signed copy from him. But he was talking about the story in the early days, how these guys came into a cafe and started pitching him. And he's like, this is stupid. Like, basically the original idea was Justin Kahn, who's in the picture, strapped a camera to his head, to a hat, and was wearing a backpack and was just live streaming his life 24/7. That was the first idea that led to Twitch. And the thing is, back then there was no like iPhone, there was no smartphone. This is like 2006. So no smartphones, you couldn't just go on Facebook Live or something like that. So this was actually pretty revolutionary tech for the time, but kind of a silly idea for a startup, right? So in 2009, I want to say, they're struggling. They're, 3 months away from running out of cash and just going under completely. And they're having these serious conversations, the 4 co-founders, and they're saying, hey, what are we going to do here? Like, are we either going to shut the company down, get profitable, raise more money? Like, what are we going to do? And it was a tough market because of the global financial crisis, so they couldn't raise more money. So they said, we got to get profitable. It's the only path forward. And in those 3 months, they started looking at the data. And they had a lot of internal debates. What is the best path forward to profitability? And thankfully, Emmett, who was a CEO, I'm blanking on his last name, but he had the foresight to say, hey, let's look at the actual user data. And he noticed that the people who were using the platform the most, in the beginning it was just Justin Kahn, right? Then people were tuning in. Then they said, hey, we're going to allow other people to stream their lives. And that was how it started to grow. And there was a subset of users who was using it way more than everybody else. And these were gamers. They were streaming themselves playing games online. And so they said, hey, why don't we just go all in and focus on that demographic instead of everybody else? The other thing the other key insight that they unlocked was, they were trying to focus both on the consumers, like the viewers, as well as the creators. And they said, screw everybody else, let's focus on the creators. because the creators are bringing their own audience on board. And they did those two things, and they were already halfway through the year, and they're about to go under. They ended up closing out the year profitable, made like 800 grand in profit that year, and then the next year, like multi-millions in profit. And then the company scaled. They ended up exiting to Amazon, $970 million exit. So it was a very untraditional path to get there, but the key thing that they did was they looked at the user data, and they looked at how the users were using their product. And then, last thing or two. So one, if you solve a problem for yourself, it's sort of a hack in a way because you are your own user. So you can actually trust your own intuition and your gut a little bit more. If you're building for somebody else, if you're not your own target user or audience, then you really can't trust your gut that well. You have to just drop every conviction that you have and just listen to the user. So now you've got to be careful with this because if you're building for yourself, you might have this idea that everybody else in the world has the same problem as you. And it can be true, but it also can be false. So if you're building for yourself, you need to get out there and validate that there's other people just like you who have the same problem and who will be willing to pay money for it. So I think, we're going to skip the activity, but that is it for today. So are there any questions on what we covered or anything about Startup Launch Competition? I know it was a long session, so thank you for hanging with us and keeping the focus. But question over here.
Yeah, when do you know when you should be discouraged if somebody else is doing the exact same thing as you?
That's a great question. When should you know if you should be discouraged by competitors? So I think the point you should be discouraged is if you can't figure out any tangible or realistic differentiator between what you're doing and what they're doing. So if you see there's a lot of people, it's okay to enter a market that's very saturated and crowded, and there's a lot of competitors, but you have to have some unique insight and typically the best businesses are based on secrets almost. It's not like a trade secret, but it's something that everybody else disagrees with, or that is right in front of everybody else, but none of them see, and none of them have any interest in it. This is how all the small companies, like Google was not the first search engine. Google was the 11th search engine. And when Google launched, so many investors were like, oh, cool, there's already a bunch of these, what's different? But the Google founders had a key insight, which was, we're going to organize results by, they were using, it was called PageRank. So they were organizing things by relevancy and by amount of clicks, of viewers. So it was a small thing, but nobody else was doing that. And so they were going against, back then, Ask Jeeves and all Yahoo and these big incumbents that already had millions of users. But they had this key insight, and they saw the metrics and the data, and they were growing rapidly, and it was getting better and better over time. So I think you need to make sure that you have some path to be able to become 10x better than what's out there, or you need to, it's almost like the companies that enter these saturated markets, it's not even that they're directly competing. They're just, the product is so different that it's not even the competitors would not even see them as a threat. But eventually, as you grow, you become a threat to them, right? So, but you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be able to analyze what's out there, and do you have something that's unique and different from that? Great question. Question?
Is there any, US organization that helps with the accounting part? Let's say you're already starting doing sales. In my case, is different because I'm not from here, right? So how we can get support from the accounting part, because you're getting income from that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So are there any resources for accounting or bookkeeping? So it's, when you're small, it's something that you can do yourself, but it does take a lot. It's very tedious and takes a lot of time and can be very annoying. Oftentimes, I would suggest finding a local bookkeeper. Bookkeepers are usually not super expensive, and they can they could spend like 2 hours a month and just organize everything for you into spreadsheets. And then when it's time to file taxes, like you would have everything organized. We were doing everything ourselves. We have 2 separate companies. One is the actual venture fund, which for that, we're not doing ourselves. We have a professional service, like tax and accounting team that focuses specifically on funds. But we have a separate company that's the events company. And now this company has kind of scaled up and is doing, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue and has probably thousands of transactions a year. And so that one is a little bit more complex. So we're actually working with like a bookkeeper, and we also transitioned to a new bank. It's called RHO. It's like RHO. It's like a neobank, and basically every time that you swipe your business card, you get a text, and you can reply to that text with a receipt, a picture of the receipt of whatever you just bought, and it automatically files that, and then it integrates with QuickBooks as well. So like QuickBooks is something that I would take a look at. I would talk to some local bookkeepers as well, and then I would look into RHO if you are genuinely like concerned about this, and like that can make things easier. For us, it made things a lot easier because it's just instant. Every transaction, send the receipt, and then you're good.
But you have to have already a legal structure to do that, right?
Yes. So yes, you want to have a legal structure. I mean, if you're doing transactions already, that money needs to be going somewhere. I assume if you don't have a business account, it's going to your personal account. So eventually you do want to set up, if you don't plan on raising capital, you could set up an LLC, Florida LLC. It's super quick. It costs like $150 or something, and you're good. If you do plan on raising capital, then you should be a Delaware C Corp. You could be a C Corp elsewhere, but that's just what all investors are used to, and that's the standard. A lot of people are moving now to Nevada C Corps as well, but I mean, I would just do Delaware C Corp, play it safe if you're planning on raising money. And you could do that either through the Delaware website. I mean, there's a lot of like scam websites or other websites that just charge you more money. Just make sure it says .gov. Or you could use, if you've heard of Stripe. Stripe is like a massive now payment processing company. They have a product for startups called Stripe Atlas, and they make it super simple to incorporate as a Delaware C Corp. It probably costs a little bit more, but it's very straightforward. So you could just do that too. Yeah, good question. Anything else? What's up?
Is that what you did?
No, we didn't use Stripe Atlas. We just, for the fund, we had the professional like law firm and a fund admin shop that set up everything for us. For our other company, we had the same company that we've been using for the events company. We've been using it for events since like 2019. So it was like a Florida LLC, and then now we have there's like multiple companies. We have like a third one that manages special purpose vehicles, which is like just like specific investments outside of the fund. So, yeah. Question?
How did you and Justis like organize yourselves as partners in the early stages of starting all these things? Like, would you guys use any tools for that, or just to kind of like know what you guys are doing day to day and whatnot?
That's a really great question. In the early days of how we got started was very just like it is for any startup. It's just like messy, and like there was actually like 5 of us involved in like the early days of OneSixOne, and then me and Justis were like the 2 last standing basically. But in those days, again, we were not even trying to build a firm. We knew very little about venture capital. We were just hosting events, so it was a lot simpler. As things progressed, when the pandemic happened, we launched the accelerator, and that was fully virtual. So at that point, we were looking for more tools and ways to stay up to date and continue to talk and all that. But to be honest with you guys, we've tried so many tools. We've tried Notion, we've tried Asana, we've tried all these different things, Google Docs, whatever. Like, I think the key or the most important thing is just being in close proximity with whoever you're building with. And that's what's really helped us, is like we are often like, whenever we're in Gainesville, we're living together. When we're in South Florida, oftentimes we're either living together or we're like seeing each other like every day, every other day. Just, you want to have as little latency as possible with any information on what's going on, what customers are we talking to, what are we doing. in the beginning, it's easier because there's less going on. There's less customers, there's less traction, there's less things. As things start to ramp up, it becomes more difficult, especially as you start adding more people and you start doing more things, more customers, more revenue, more different channels and things that you're doing. But I think the best thing is just talking regularly, which it's difficult that me and Justis go like a day without talking, like even weekends, you know? We're constantly seeing each other. When we're not seeing each other, we're on phone calls. I was on a couple calls with him today. So you just want to be talking regularly. You can use these tools. Like I think Notion, I think these tools have a lot of value if you use them right. And I think that we haven't done it yet because we're not big enough to a point where we absolutely have to do it. And I think neither of us are great at that particular thing when it comes to like the organization side of things and like doing things like, you know, like a corporation or like setting up processes and procedures and like all these other things. Eventually that will be necessary for us, but right now it's not. And now we do have like a third, he's like a venture partner. So he's not like a managing partner like me and Justis, but he's somebody who's like doing a lot of similar things to what me and Justis are doing. And, you know, he's on the West Coast. So we'll still talk to him like a couple times a week. Christopher, yeah. Did you get to meet him?
Yeah, I met him at the Rain AI thing, and then he spoke to my get a meeting.
Oh, in Miami, that's right.
Yeah, Miami.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was actually just calling me like 30 minutes ago. So I talked to him also like, you know, every day or every other day. We're constantly on email threads, text, we have a group text. So I think that, yeah, you just want to have low latency, be in constant communication. There's no need to use all these tools. You can, and it can be helpful, especially like if you're trying to sell to a lot of different people, it's a great way to track that. The key is you have to stay up to date with it. Otherwise, it becomes useless. And like we've been paying for Notion. You know, there's like a push for us to use Notion for like a while, and we were like, we'll give it a try. And like we've been paying for it for like 5 months, and we like have barely used it. I think we used it for a couple weeks, and then like probably gonna cancel soon. I don't know, but at some point, you know, as we grow. Cool. Any last questions? If not, we will wrap up.
How'd you come up with the name OneSixOne?
How did we come up with the name OneSixOne? Does anybody know? You know? Golden ratio. Okay, but now how do we come up with it? Different questions. So, interesting story. The first name that we had was like not really appropriate because, okay, I'm happy to share the story another time. I'm not going to bore you guys with a long story, but the first name before it was OneSixOne Ventures, it was called the Empty Bottle Club. And again, we were just hosting events, and there's a long story why that was the name. And we were not just a bunch of alcoholics, but we got to a point where the events were getting a lot of exposure, and we were starting to get a lot of like university officials, city commissioners, and other just, you know, reputable people in the city that wanted to come to our events. But we were also having a lot of students at our events, and some of them may not have been 21. And of course, the events, like there was alcohol, there was food. It wasn't about, you know, just drinking. It was about actually like having great conversations and networking. But we got to a point where we were like, okay, we have to change the name. Like I didn't want to put on my LinkedIn that I'm a founder of the Empty Bottle Club because people are going to think I'm an alcoholic, and I'm like, you know. So we just decided one day, like, yeah, we got to change this. And I believe that was middle of 2019, I want to say. And so we got together at one of the other people who was involved in the origin story of OneSixOne. We got together at his place, and we just grilled for like 4 hours, eating and brainstorming and sharing ideas and trying to figure out a new name. And yeah, I forget exactly who came up with the idea, but somebody threw that out there, and then we started thinking about, okay, like that'd be interesting from a branding standpoint. We could do this, do that, and then even after that dinner, we were like, okay, we're not like fully sold on it, but like if we don't come up with anything in the next like week or two, then we'll stick with it. And then we did, and I personally love it now. Like I think it's a great story. There's a lot of people that we tell the story of the name, and they're like, oh my gosh, I love that. Like some people like nerd out over it. They're like, what? That's fascinating. And it just turns out that the Cade Museum, so who knows who the Cade family is? Yeah, you know, a couple people. So Dr. Robert Cade is the inventor of Gatorade. And so the Cade family, they built the Cade Museum over in Depot Park. And it turns out that they used the Fibonacci sequence, or the golden ratio, in the construction of that museum. If you look at the dome and like the structure and also the placement of where they put it in Depot Park, they have like a drone picture and they just do the little loop and it just shows you like, anyways, when we ended up reconnecting with Phoebe, who's Dr. Robert Cade's daughter, and told her about what we were doing and the name, it was just like so like synergistic. She was like, what, there's no way, this is so cool. And then she ended up being one of our first investors in the fund, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, I like the name. Cool. All right, well, thank you so much, guys, for coming out. You guys are welcome to hang around, mingle, whatever you guys would like. And I'll be around for a little bit as well.